What is up, fight fans? I am Jason Burgos for Sportsnaut.com, and you got to start here. UFC 275, fantastic card. I mean, it's definitely going to be one of those fights and events that will be in there in the conversation for the 2022 pay-per-view of the year and just fight card of the year. So many interesting finishes, so many interesting stories and narratives that follow the event, but really the most influential stuff happened at the top. The three top fights, the two title fights, and the featured fight between Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Weili Zhang at strawweight. But first, we got to start with Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira, the big fight, the main event fight. Firstly, let's just talk about why that fight was freaking fantastic. I mean, one of the best light heavyweight fights, and especially light heavyweight title fights I've ever seen. Yeah, everybody's going to talk about it. You know, it's going into the UFC Hall of Fame in a few weeks with Jon Jones and Alexander Gustafsson. One fantastic fight, brutal fight, violent fight. This fight for me, though, with Prochazka and Teixeira is just as good because, yeah, it was brutal, it was violent, there was a lot of things like that happened, but there was also a fantastic amount of technique. That fight showcased what makes MMA so good, what it makes it so diverse, and it just displayed the best elements of MMA in the transitions, the ground games. Prochazka showed that he's just as skilled on the ground as he is on the feet, reversals, you know, switching positions, all this kind of stuff. It was a great fight, still violent on the feet. And then also you had this fantastic finish with like 30-something seconds left. Prochazka wins the title in a fight that he was probably going to lose on the scorecards in a very highly competitive affair. I mean, just fantastic thing. Now, with that fight done, what should be next? What's the question? Who is going to fight Jiri Prochazka next? The assumption going into this fight was that Jan Blachowicz was the clear and present favorite to then go on to fight the winner of Teixeira versus Prochazka, but I don't really know about that. I like Jan. I've talked to him several times. Fantastic guy. But how do you not, in a world in the UFC where they make rematches all the damn time? We saw 3 straight fights between Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo, which maybe that wasn't even necessary. But how do you not make a rematch of what's going to be a top 3 all-time light heavyweight title fight? Especially with Glover, his fame is as good as it's going to be. He's 42. He's not getting any younger. He's not going to get more opportunities. Does he really need to go back down in the pecking order and work his way back up for Jan? I mean, I feel bad for Jan, but he lost to Glover. His last fight against Alexander Rakic, he won the fight due to a Rakic injury. He wasn't, getting beaten or anything. It was a close fight, but getting into a title fight off of another guy getting injured in your fight, and that's your knockout into a title opportunity, doesn't look as good as rematch of one of the best fights of this year and one of the best title fights in that division's history. So, it's going to be a tough choice for the UFC. I think it's an obvious one, but you never know. You never know. The idea of selling a all-Europe title fight between Blachowicz and Prochazka in somewhere like Poland or Czechoslovakia, that's a big sell too. So it'll be interesting to see what they do next. Next, the co-main event, Valentina Shevchenko versus Taila Santos in a title fight for the flyweight title fight. Very close fight. A lot of people thought Santos won. It sure seemed like it. The third round is going to be the one that is the one that's going to be the most scrutinized of the two, the 5. And it all shifted when a clash of heads pretty much broke Taila Santos' orbital bone, and she wasn't quite the same fighter in the last 2 rounds. Lost those 2 rounds for sure, and ended up losing her opportunity to dethrone and derail this unbelievable dominant train that Valentina Shevchenko has been thus far. And the real question from it for me, and it should be for fans too, is for the first time in about 7 years, Valentina Shevchenko finally looked human. But the question is that good for the UFC or is that bad for the UFC? There's a lot of conversation about, maybe Valentina will go back up to bantamweight and fight for a title, take another opportunity to become a champ. But is the opportunity of her being human for once, for the division finally looking like there's competitive opposition for the first time in all this time that she's dominated on an elite level and historic level, maybe it's better for flyweight. that she is finally, maybe she's declining. Maybe the time has finally caught up with the realities, finally caught up with her unbelievable pound for pound any gender skills, and maybe finally flyweight will be a little bit more of a competitive division instead of, well, who's gonna lose to Valentina next. And now we might have that. Santos is deserving of a rematch. She's the first person to make Valentina look mortal since the GOAT of female fighters in Amanda Nunes did it in their rematch years ago, and Nunes barely got out of that with a split decision. So for me, I think it's probably for the best. You know, I personally wasn't dying to see Shevchenko versus Nunes 3. If that happens, definitely not as interested in Shevchenko versus Juliana Pena. If Juliana Pena beats Nunes, which is possible, and Shevchenko could definitely beat her, but I'm for flyweight becoming a more competitive division and a more interesting division. Moving on from there, let's go back further down the card to the other featured bout at strawweight. Joanna Jacek versus Weili Zhang. The rematch of the greatest women's MMA fight of all time. One of the best MMA fights in general I've ever seen. In the end, Zhang proves how elite she is. She gets the W, spinning back fist, KOs Joanna, and Joanna ends up retiring after the fight. Not surprising that Joanna made that decision. If you follow her for the last 2+ years where she's been away from sports, she's clearly developing her life outside of MMA, and the fact that she lost, was never probably going to get a title shot again, that motivation of being champion, being the best, probably being completely taken away. Not surprising that she called a career. What does it mean in terms of her history? Yeah, she ended her career on a disappointing note. I believe she lost 5 of her last 7. But elite competition lost to like Zhang, like Shevchenko, lost to Rose Namajunas. I mean, these are some of the greatest female fighters of all time, so it's not a lot of shame in that. And otherwise, beyond having a tough end to her career, which is the story for most great fighters, she's going to be one of the greatest female fighters ever. She's definitely top 2 or 3 strawweight ever. Her influence away from MMA, how she helped the culture of fight sports and MMA see women as equal level talent as men. She was extremely important in something like that. She was the one that shows, yes, that woman is just as good as fighter as that elite male fighter, and the women's division are on the same level as the male's division. So her legacy in the UFC is completely set. She's an all-timer. She's going to be in the Hall of Fame, and it's disappointing to see her go, but not necessarily surprising, and a fitting show that we were into the next era fighter. She was from the Ronda age, and her and Ronda were top stars. Now that transition has now to Rose and Shevchenko and Weili Zhang and these kinds of talents, and it's a new era in women's MMA. And that was the big stories for me for UFC 275. Going away from UFC 275, let's talk a quick bit about some of the latest news in the sport. On the same UFC 275 card, during the broadcast, they officially announced that Kamaru Usman versus Leon Edwards 2 will officially happen on August 20th at UFC 278 in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's a fight that had to happen. Leon Edwards was probably deserving of this title opportunity in freaking a year ago when he fought Nate Diaz. That Nate Diaz win only just clearly solidified it a little bit more. The fight that needs to happen. Fascinating because it's a rematch, and both men are very much different than they were back then. Far better. It's that stuff in terms of the rematch matters on a level, but since they are so much better, it doesn't. And it's a fascinating clash. Obviously, Kamaru, as one of the best pound-for-pound fighters, and the best probably, is going to be the favorite. But Leon Edwards is a very interesting challenger. And finally, in a sport and a promotion where sometimes the challengers for titles maybe aren't as deserving, there's no more deserving challenger for a title than Leon Edwards at welterweight. Moving on from that, one of the other biggest stories this past week, Dana White seems to be open to the idea of a Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler fight. The fight makes sense. It's a fitting fight. Chandler's brand name is as strong as ever. It makes more sense than it did maybe a year or two ago when Chandler was really pushing it. When he debuted with the UFC, his brand within the UFC is as strong as ever. The only reason I don't like that is Chandler is a deserving contender at lightweight. He should be in the conversation for a lightweight title shot. And if maybe he doesn't deserve to be in an interim into the vacated title fight with Charles Oliveira, he's right there. He's within. His only losses to the champion, and then in a Fight of the Year candidate to the guy who just fought for the title. I mean, it's elite stuff. Me personally, even though Dana White shot down the idea in the same interview with TMZ Sports where he was for Conor McGregor and Chandler, is Jorge Masvidal. That's the fight to me. Conor McGregor wants to fight a welterweight, so if he fought Chandler, it would probably be a welterweight fight, and how that doesn't seem worth it for Chandler. It's worth the money-wise, but relevancy-wise, it affects what his relevancy is at lightweight. With Jorge Masvidal, he's a welterweight. Conor wants to fight a welterweight. Jorge Masvidal's a 3-fight lose streak. Conor's lost 3 out of 4. Both in terms of where they're at in the sport right now, it makes the most sense. Plus, it's one of the more exciting. These are elite strikers. These are 2 of the best strikers in the promotion, 2 of the most popular fighters in the promotion. You can't make much more of a better fight between 2 guys that are like 7-1. I mean 1-7 in their last bunch of fights. You know, this is a worthwhile matchup for them at this juncture, especially Jorge Masvidal. Especially if you put the BMF title on the line, just add that extra layer. Jorge is closing on 40. He's not going to be able to do this much longer. His value is going to only decline with losses. So why waste a loss on maybe a lesser name and let it be to Conor? And the UFC clearly wants to get Conor back in any title picture. So if he beat Jorge Masvidal, that name value, it would certainly help them in that cause, in that pursuit of the less than relevant but money-making title fights for Conor McGregor in the future. Another piece of information out there is Ronda Rousey recently said in an interview there will be one opponent that will make it willing for her to possibly come back in a fight. And she said, this is, I quote, "I've said it a million times. It's not like it's something new, but for Gina Carano. She's the reason why I got into fighting. She's the reason why I knew it was possibility. I will always be forever grateful." Yeah, I don't care about Ronda Rousey versus Gina Carano. Gina Carano hasn't fought in over a decade. Why would anyone care for that fight? It's pointless. And it just seems like Ronda just wants a fight where she's going to win, and that's clearly a fight that she would win in. She's not coming back anyway. Don't see any reason. She's probably making a ton of money to be pushed as a dominant superstar in WWE. She's a current SmackDown Women's Champion in WWE. What's the point of her doing MMA and further damaging her legacy? That said, if there were some possible fights for her in the UFC, she'd had the bug, really want to get back. The most obvious is one, Amisha Tate Part 3. Even though she has 2 wins over Misha, it probably wouldn't appeal to her. That's the most sellable fight for both of them at this juncture in their careers, in their lives, and their legacy in the sport. They're forever connected. And if Misha is a better fighter than she was back then, it's an easy sell. And those fights were interesting, especially the rematch. The first was not close. Second went a little further. That's the fight to make, and it's a pure entertainment scrap for Ronda Rousey one-off comeback. The other options is Juliana Pena. I mean, that's the fight that it's the most relevant. It's a title fight where I think Ronda would have a chance to win. I don't think she would, because Pena is a good wrestler. She's double tough. Ronda's knocking her out, but that is a fight that is sellable. Juliana Pena would build it up, sell it up. There's a connection between Juliana Pena being on Miesha Tate's team against Ronda Rousey's team on the Ultra Fighter. There's a lot of connection there that makes it a super easy fight to sell, and that's the one you can go with. Also, one last piece of combat sports news: Jake Paul announced this past week he will be returning August 6th in Madison Square Garden with Amanda Serrano from his MVP Fight Sports promotion on the undercard. Still hasn't announced who that opponent is. The likely one is probably going to be Tyson Fury's half brother. I'm losing. I'm drawing Tommy Fury. That's probably who the opponent's going to be. But it's an interesting fight. It's not as sexy as Ben Askren and Tyron Woodley, but in Madison Square Garden on the same card as Amanda Serrano, who had this unbelievable fight early in the year with Katie Taylor. It's a fight. It's an interesting card, and as a New Yorker, I hope to possibly be there for it. Moving on. UFC Fight Night Austin is this weekend, June 18. First off, very good card for Fight Night cards that are usually not very good nowadays, especially the UFC Apex, as the UFC continues to just create content for their Disney, ABC, ESPN overlords and just bringing them fights every week. Some of the cards suffer and they're not as good, but now that the UFC is expanding, they're going to cities. They're not just putting on cards in their home offices. They're trying to put on cards that bring people to an arena. The UFC Austin card is very good. At the top, you got Calvin Kattar versus Josh Emmett. Fantastic fight in the men's featherweight division. It's a fascinating match in that Cavalcater's a very talented striker, very good boxer, real good takedown defense. Josh Emmett, very good wrestler, but has gotten away from his wrestling a little bit because he is a power puncher. He has become a good striker. Interesting mix of going together. Me personally, I'm going to pick Calvin Kattar in this one. I think he'll do enough to keep it on the feet, and he's the better striker, the smart fight IQ. He's not gonna to get crazy out there, and even if he has clear advantages, I think he gets this fight done. Though, if it's a battle of who's more deserving for a title fight from this, Josh M is probably a little bit more deserving in terms of if he won, it would be 6 in a row. Calvin Kattar's not that far removed from the Max Holloway loss, which is a lot of people still are going to remember that for a long time and how badly he was brutalized in that fight. But either way, whoever wins this is a strong candidate to maybe get one more win and a title fight maybe early next year. So it's big fight in the division. On from that, in the co-main event, Joe Lozon versus Donald Cerrone. This fight was moved back. It was originally on a few cards ago, and it's an interesting fight. It's a clash of UFC MMA graybeards, two of the highest Fight Night bonus winners in UFC history. These guys have been known for long careers of getting finishes or even getting finished in their fight. Two of the more exciting fighters in MMA and UFC history. For me, I'm gonna pick Donald Cerrone. I just think he has a better skill set, even though he's on more of he's on a losing streak. At least Joe's won his last fight, even though that was quite a while ago. I think Donald Cerrone has a more dangerous skill set even now, that he should still be able to beat Joe Lozon. In the end, it kind of should be a loser leaves town match, in that they both are well past their prime, but it's one of those instances where they're both names. So the UFC likes keeping them around to help build other names. It's nice to see them just go against each other and build their own legacies in fights that are fun for fans, where maybe the supporters won't see them get knocked out, or it's a dangerous fight where they lose to a lesser name and it leaves you sad at the end of the card. So it's a fascinating fight. It's a co-main event. It's going to be fun to watch. Another big fight on the UFC Fight Night Austin card is Tim Means versus Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland's going to be a sizable favorite as he goes down from middleweight to welterweight to fight Tim Means, but Tim Means is a very live underdog. Tim Means may not be a freak athlete. He may not be as gifted as a striker as someone like Kevin Holland, but he is durable. He's got tons of experience, and that dude he's Means. Yes, I used it. I did. I went there. But it's a fascinating fight. If you want to pick Tim Means, it's not a bad option, especially how is cutting down that extra 15 pounds going to affect Kevin Holland. He was never a huge middleweight, so he should be able to do it, but it's still difficult. It's still 15 pounds, and when you're in fantastic shape, cutting 15 pounds off of little fat is going to be a difficult task. So, mattering how that affects him, he should be the favorite, but it very well could go the other way, and Tim Means can make this fight very interesting. But my pick is Kevin Holland. Going down from that, some of the other fights you should really look for on a really strong fight night card coming up this weekend. Julian Marquez versus Gregory RoboCop Rodriguez, fascinating fight. RoboCop's coming off a loss. Julian Marquez is coming off a few wins. He's become this guy that he's a must-watch when he wins for his post-fight interviews, calling on Miley Cyrus, calling for games with Kansas City Chiefs players. Nice guy, cool guy. That's a fascinating fight because both of them have resumes of getting finishes on the feet and on the ground. That fight is not built to go the distance. Joaquin Buckley versus Albert Duraev. Duraev is a rising prospect, ACB, Russia. Joaquin Buckley, we all know, one of the greatest knockouts of all time over Impa Kasanganay. So that's a fight very interesting. The exciting fighter Buckley. Duraev is a very good fighter, rising talent. That's a guy to look for. Eddie Wineland versus Cody Stamen. That's a big, a worthwhile fight in the bantamweight division. Eddie Wineland's a tried and true, solid, super strong veteran. Cody Stamen was a guy who was in the top 15 for a long time. Very talented. Hey, he lost some fights, but to very talented fighters too. That's an interesting fight. Two good, strong veterans with very different stylistic ways of winning. Eddie Wineland's more a striker. Cody Stamen likes to strike a lot, but he still has his bread and butter is his wrestling. And beyond that, Adrian Yanez is back. One of the most exciting fighters in the bantamweight division is going against Tony Kelly. Tony Kelly's a nice rising talent too. Another important step for Adrian Yanez in his development as he works his way up the division. One of the better boxers of the young talents coming up. That's a guy that you have to watch anytime he fights. He's that kind of exciting fighter.